Council website to be viewed following the meeting. As part of the video recording, your image and sound will be captured for the duration of your attendance within the meeting. Can I remind members that if they do have any confidential or personal information, to keep this away from the view of the camera. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Right. Start the meeting off on first item is to remind members of the 5 statutory functions of the Joint Overview Scrutiny Committee. They are on your agenda, so I want members to make sure that they take note of those as we proceed with our work. Item 2, call for any declarations of interest. No declarations. Third item on the agenda then is the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 6th of October. I need a mover and a seconder for those minutes. Can someone please move?
Happy to move.
Second, Chair.
Yeah. Did we get
Councillor
that?
Fred Bledsoe, it was that moved.
Okay, then. That's great. Thank you. Right, straight on to reports now. And it's the report of the work of the co-production network. So if we can start that work now, please.
Yeah, hi, good morning.
Good
My name
morning,
is
Becky.
Morning. Thank you for having me this morning. Yeah, I'm Becky. I'm one of the associates with the co-production network for Wales, and I'm going to take you through a bit of the work we're going to be doing. So, Sarah, I think you've got my slides, hopefully. So it's not too word heavy. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of a kind of taster of what we've been doing, some of the what that looks like, but really focusing on how do we work in that space. So just to give you, if you haven't heard of the Co-Production Network for Wales, we're a membership organisation. We're open to individuals and organisations, and the work that we do is really around co-production and involvement. We want to build up a community of practice and really embed how we do that in public services. The project that we're involved in the work with the PSBs is Project Derry, and this is a 5-year lottery funded project. If you want to skip over to the next slide, please. So just to embed it in context, I'm sure that many of you know this. And this is from the Future Gens report of 2020 of the, public bodies should be embedding a culture of citizen and stakeholder involvement. And this means having meaningful conversations with people in communities. Oh, I've lost my screen. Sorry, everybody. You can see that one. There you go. Conversations with people in communities, finding out what matters to them and reflecting their views before decisions are reached. And for us, that's really about how do we do that piece of collaboration work. And so when we're doing this piece of work around Project Derry is really sat in that space. And working out how do we get communities involved, and community in every sense of the word. We're not just thinking geographical communities, there might be special interest communities and all sorts of things like that. So this is just really useful to keep that in mind if this is the context where we're working in terms of the co-production network. I want to move on to the next one, and just to give you an overview of what that looks like across Wales. So the project's working with 3 clusters, including Cwmtaf Morgannwg, and we also work with a cluster in North Wales and West Wales. And the aims of Project Derry are, as it says on the screen, to work alongside PSB teams to support the practical implementation and develop capabilities, capacity and confidence. We're really there to support in terms of hand-holding, sharing some practice and provide people with the confidence to experiment and try it out. We want to create the conditions for sustainable relationships between organisations and with communities and citizens. And that's ensuring that, when we leave and the work that we've been doing at CoPro, working alongside people, that continues. This is just not a one-off piece for that piece of funding, in the same way that however that fits within the wellbeing plans, that's not just a one-off piece of work, but that this is continued. And to develop meaningful engagement opportunities, including with seldom heard voices. So that's about making sure that we don't just helicopter in, have a chat with somebody and off we go. And how does that actually feel for people? And how do we find out whether or not it's meaningful? So that's just a sense of what the whole project is doing. I just wanted to give you that idea, just in case you've never heard of the Co-Production Network. Project Dowie is not a name that we kind of use a lot in terms of the work we're doing. Just gives you a sense of where this has come from. And so more broadly, we've got a whole PSB learning network that goes alongside that. So, and that's open to all PSBs. And so that's where we can really share some of that wider experience and knowledge and what people have been trying out. We do a lot of things where we just sort of steal ideas from one another and find out if somebody's done something that's worked really well, maybe we can adopt that. And we've seen things like the Insights Partnership in North Wales working really well, and learning from that and maybe adapting that for how that can work within the CTM. And so we do that. We have monthly learning events for all PSPs and their members, which everybody's invited along to. We had one this week that was about the basics of co-production and really understanding what co-production is, and by that we mean sort of involvement. And we've also got an online space where you can go back and revisit things. So it's just that little additional. What I really want to get us into is what the work is that we've been doing. So if I can move you on to the next slide, which is a sort of spider diagram. And you'll see in there that I've put down, what does this look like? So I'm really looking at, you know, those real focused pieces of work that we've been doing. So if you had a list, you could tick them off. And some of those whats have really have been around. We have fortnightly meetings with the PSB officers, where that's a space to have that conversation. That's been working really well. At the last 10 or 15 minutes of those meetings, we've had members of staff from Future Generations officers join in for that, and just building out what happens in those meetings a bit, and it just gives us some forward momentum. As I've mentioned, we've got the learning events that we do more widely, and that's part of what we do as a network, and we invite members into it. We're having regular meetings with the Future Gens office, so that's you know, between Co-Production Network and Future Gens in a Wales-wide context, but also with Christian and Colleen in terms of supporting the work with CTM, and we're doing that just to it's really good practice. It's a really great relationship to be building on, and we want to work as closely as we can with Future Gens and with our new commissioner as well. We're in attendance at the PSB meetings. That's been really good, and if it's appropriate, we'll have a spot on the agenda, but we're there. We've done some work around gathering feedback, and that's part of having those regular meetings, but that's also one-off pieces of work. So we will invite almost like an evaluation at the end of a session. So at the last PSB meeting, we used something called Mentimeter, which is an online tool where you can just do sort of one word, what did you think? It's completely confidential and anonymous, and so it's a really useful way of just getting some sort of checkout feedback about the events and the PSB meetings, and a sense of how we can move that on and share that experience. As I've said, we work with the wider Dowie team at Co-Production Network, so we work with our other consultants in North Wales and West Wales, drawing on their skills and experiences and ideas, and also being able to draw in their skills and experiences, where somebody might have some really good knowledge, particularly around, I'm thinking, Insights Partnership. We're able to draw in Mike, our consultant, working in that space to really support us to understand how was that set up, what have they learned along the way, and that's really useful. We facilitate events, jumped up into the top left corner. So we are there to facilitate things, and as I'll show some of that in a bit with the collaboration event that we undertook back in July. And we're there to facilitate where's needed. We're not there to direct the conversation. We have dialogue with the PSB members, and I'll talk a little bit about how we do that on the next slide. And then we're there to advocate for that community involvement piece, and really how do we support seldom heard voices to come into these spaces? How do we support ourselves to go into other spaces and visit people? What does the invitation look like? What is the language we're using? How can we do that? So that's a kind of broader values piece with there. And we're there for general support in this space. If there's a question around, does this email read right, maybe, or how can we change up this activity? Can we plan a meeting in a different way? Then Trina and myself are there really to support in that way. We are consultants, and that means that we're working with and alongside what's happening in the PSB. We're very much not there to do the work. We're there to support that work being undertaken. So if we want to move on to the next one, and this is the one that's going to take me a little bit longer to talk through. And this is our how do we do this? So I just wanted to share with you some really key pieces of work that we've done in the how we've gone about doing some of those things. So I've talked about, how we have dialogue, how do we work with communities, and how are we going through this sense of it being meaningful. And this is really important to us, because the output could almost be the same. You can kind of tick the box off to say that you've done something, but what's really important for us is how do we get there? How does that journey look? So some of the ways in which we've done this is we've offered members of the PSB the opportunity to have one-to-one meetings with ourselves, and Trina has held those. They started at the beginning of the year. And that offer has continued, and we've just recognised that we probably want to remake that offer out in the new year, just to see how people feel, or if people now want to take that up. And that's been a really useful piece of work. That's provided a space that's confidential for individuals to share any ideas or thoughts that they've got, how maybe they're coming in to the PSB, what are the sorts of perspectives they're bringing, the types of work, and how do they envisage it working, and really giving us the opportunity to have that space. And then those thoughts and ideas are able to be fed into thinking about how do we do this going forward? How is it if somebody offers themselves to do some facilitation or to do some planning of something, how do we ensure that we keep that conversation going and that we don't lose that momentum, particularly in a space of working collaboratively? I think it's really important that when those offers are made, that we kind of maximise them, and we take those on, and we support people to do that. So that one-to-one space has been really, really useful, and has been a really rich conversations that have come out of that. I'm going to jump down to the bottom where we've got our regular check-ins. As I mentioned, we're already facilitating our regular meetings with the support team. And what's really good about this space, and I'd hope they'd support me in what I'm about to say, is that it's agendaless, and that actually we have a huge to-do list and things to discuss each fortnight we meet. We have an hour, and we never cover off as much as we'd like to. But having that space booked in once a fortnight is really, really useful. It might be the list has just got really long. It might be that there's something that's come up, or there's a reflection piece. Monday we met to really reflect on the young people's event from last week, and it was just a really interesting space to think about, right, how do we continue to take this on? What are the things that are coming up? And building relationships, is really importantly understanding how do people work. We don't all work in the same ways, and understanding what those to-do lists look like as well, and just supporting that and getting those requests in of, how can Trina and I help? We're here to support the work, and we want to be used in the best way possible and add the most value. So that's part of our check-in space. We've got on here as well sourcing funding up at the top, and that really refers to just those conversations about how they springboard other pieces and other ideas that come up, just through wider conversations. Some of the one-to-one work has done that, some of our check-ins. I think we hear quite a lot about issues around funding and resourcing, particularly if there's specific pieces of work and projects. So that's really helped with that. We've been able to think about when we're reaching out to communities, what resources are available in those communities through having wider conversations. Things like meeting spaces, providing cups of tea, all the real basics that are so important for bringing people together. I think tea and cake is often one of the absolute, pillars of collaboration and involvement. So it's how do we ensure that we get the resourcing, financial and non-financial, to take that on. We've got the collaboration event that we held back in July. Feels like a lifetime ago. Now we're nearly approaching Christmas, and the sun was shining and we had our light evenings. And that was a really fantastic day, and we had a huge amount of people sort of turn out for that. It was really good. That was in person, and there was a few really interesting ways that we sort of did that collaboration around that. I mean, initially there's the planning process. And how do we bring people around the table to plan it? This wasn't just co-production network saying this is how this event is going to look like. This was an identification that we needed to do some more work around collaboration. What could that be? And then bringing in different people to really support with that. So we had Heleth and Colleen from Future Gens on the day. And we also invited Elizabeth Woodcock in, who's a researcher with Bangor University, to look at her work around collaboration and research. And that was a really interesting way to collaborate and bring in those three parties and look at how do we bring in practice and the research, the theory, and also how do we, ensure that we talk about collaboration in a way that's grounded in theory and practice, and it isn't just sort of a set of ideas that we've pulled together, that there's some real examples of what that looks like, and that gives space to for people to talk about, what does that mean for them, to test some things out, and it also stepping out of that formal board situation into a space where we're able to try out some activities, we're able to mix up conversations, we're able to work with different people and different groups. And I'm actually going to get you to test out a couple of those activities a bit later, if that's okay, because it wouldn't be co-production if we didn't share some of that work with you and invite you to have a think about that yourself. And then moving into the young people's event that we did last Friday, that's been a big piece of work. I don't want to spend too much time talking around this one because I know there's going to be lots coming up in this space. But just looking at how we've worked with Bridgend College to plan that, again, that's been a sort of multi-agency or, several organisations looking at how we can do that. So we've had Bridgend College involved in that. The support team have been involved in it. We've had, outside facilitation from an organisation to bring that to life, and that's a really great way of working, and we can see that sort of that how of going, how have we involved other organisation, how have we shared the responsibilities in that space, has been really great. And then we're just thinking about whenever we're doing any piece of involvement work is how do we do this long term, how do we hold on to these relationships so they're not just one-off pieces, and they've got, a legacy to them, building on that sense of meaningful. So some of what we planned in and we talk about right at the beginning of any of this work is how do we follow this up? How do we ensure that this continues? And that's there from the outset. That's not an afterthought. So we try to encourage a thinking about longer term collaboration and involvement in that space. Okay, I think we can move on to the next one. Fab. So I'm going to show you some real life pictures now of what went on, so you can see what we were up to at that collaboration event. And this was one of our first activities of the day. And at Co-Production Network, we like to do things that removes people from their tables, particularly when we're in person. It gets people talking in different ways. And as facilitators, we love post-it notes. So there's always a lot of post-it notes going on in these spaces. What we asked people to do was just to sit for a few moments and really think about what were the principles of collaboration from their point of view. What were those things that when I say the word collaboration pop into your head? What does that work look like? And once we've done that, we asked people to note those things down, take them up onto the flip charts at the back of the room and use that to prompt a discussion about what were the similarities, what were the differences, what were the different perspectives showing up. Were there some things that were more important to somebody than others? And we invited sort of the 3 groups we ended up with to really have those conversations and think about how does that work. So I'm going to invite you to do exactly the same. So if we skip to the next slide, there's a little prompt for you all there, just to think about collaboration and share what you think some of those principles might be. So I invite you to do this, you can do this just at home or in your office privately on a piece of paper. If you'd like to raise a hand and share some of those things, or more than welcome to use the chat. Any of those 3 options. If nobody wants to speak or chat, that's absolutely fine too. But just to give you a couple of minutes to think about it and share what we put our PSB members through back in July.
Anyone got any thoughts? Anybody? All right then, well, I'll kick it off if you're happy with that. My first initial thought is when you're collaborating, you must respect the opinions and views of people you were working with, even if you disagree. And then you need to work together to go through those opinions. So that would be my first starting point, is mutual respect for each other. So I've got Councillor Amanda Williams and then Councillor Simon Griffiths.
Thanks very much, Chair. I was going to say working together, but also trust, to have mutual trust that you're putting the needs of the team ahead of your own personal needs as well. And again, working together as a group for the benefit of the outcome.
Councillor Griffiths.
I think building on what you said, Chair, I think it is about that everybody's viewpoint is actually valuable. And a key to the collaboration really is about listening to the other people rather than pushing your own opinions. I think in collaboration, we're looking for synergy where you can bring together 2 or 3 different people's viewpoints, and then you can build a better idea from multiple different ideas. So it's about that building process and respecting everybody's views. Because even bad ideas sometimes combined with another bad idea can make a good idea. So yeah. I think it is about, I think, the old statement is we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, use them in that proportion. But I think it goes further than that in collaboration. I think it is about making sure that everybody in the teams can be heard. Yeah. And I think if you're a group leader in a collaboration, I think one of the real challenges is to make sure that even the quietest people who may well have the best ideas get their opportunity to be heard.
Absolutely, absolutely. The other members? No.
That's fab.
No, I've got nobody else coming through.
That's good. That's okay. It's just good to have that thinking and just thank you for those of you who have spoken. And there was some really there was a couple of pieces that really sat there with me around trust that came up at the event. Respect, having shared goals. I really love what you were saying then about, from 2 bad ideas we can get 1 really great idea, and how do we work through that? What does it mean to work through that? We had other things that came through, sort of like having a level playing field. So you might have somebody who is really at the far into that journey of collaboration, really experienced, done lots of it, and we might also have other members at the table who don't do this very often, and it's how do we make the time for that as well. So this was a really useful activity for beginning to think about the sort of, well, what does it look like when we say collaboration? What does that actually mean? And as we went into the rest of the day, really understanding a sense of, okay, so we think it means all these things. We think we know what partnership working looks like. We think, you know, we know what that means for an idea or an output or an outcome. But how do we know that we're doing it? What maybe are some of the barriers to this? What are some of the barriers to building trust? What are the barriers to partnership working in organisations that have got multiple pressures and sort of demands on their time and their resources and their team members? So thank you for participating in that one. The next thing that we really like to do, and we'll skip into the next slide, is to do one of my favourite activities, which is called Paper People. And in Paper People, what we the point of this is really getting to know one another. And I think in lots of spaces, we see each other maybe in person, maybe 3 or 4 times a year. Meetings are very structured around an agenda. And so what we get is we know little bits about one another. We understand little bits of the networks we're connected to. And one of the things we really is really embedded into the work that we do at co-production is a value around working across silos and working across networks and having that partnership approach and that collaborative approach. And to do this, we recognise that sometimes you just need to know a little bit more about one another. So as a photo you saw just now of everybody stood around the table looking at the people, what I'd asked people to do was we issued everybody with, like, it's a bit like a gingerbread man, which automatically makes you smile when you hand these out in a room, or makes people roll their eyes at you. Either way, I'm happy with either of those responses. They're both valid. And I asked people to do a little self-portrait. Lots of us haven't drawn since school, so it's always nice to do a little bit of drawing. And then just to have a think about, you know, what are our roles and responsibilities? Who are we? What are the things that we're connected to? We might be at the PSB board as a member of something else, but we might also be volunteering in a local group. We might be visiting a community centre. There are lots of other ways in which we're connected to our communities and we have our networks. So again, if we skip on to that next slide of doing that, you know, who's in the room mapping, which is kind of a nice fancy way of saying let's do Paper People, is just to really encourage that work in this space around, you know, what are our other connections? What are the other groups we know? How can we work with them? You know, we talk about open doors. Is there an organisation that has an open door to us? And through that, we can help to build relationships with our communities and really involve people. And if you fancy it for Friday afternoon, maybe take a piece of paper and do yourself a little self-portrait and start thinking about what are those other networks, partnerships that you've got, all those meetings that you attend, who is it that you meet? And then when you next meet somebody who's here on this meeting today in person, maybe share that. Did you do that activity? You know, did you map down? What did you find out? And maybe use that to start a different conversation, find out about one another. We always find out that somebody's like does crazy triathlons and things when we do this, and somebody who we didn't know who was amazing at running long distances does it all the time. So it always just helps, and that's part of being collaborative as well. So the collaboration event was really great at supporting us into this space. If I could have the next slide. So I'd just like to then move into sort of the work that we're doing and have been doing around involvement. And I've put a photo here of myself and Trina at the Young People's event last Friday. I didn't want to spoil any of the outputs that the young people might be pulling together or anything else. And the only photo I've got of us is with David Attenborough. So this is the photo I'm using to illustrate this. And it's not just because it's the only photo I can use. I'm really pleased to have met a cardboard version of David Attenborough, but also because there's a couple of things that show up in the background of this image. We can see that along with the co-production Network for Wales logo, we've got the logos of the 3 colleges, showing that this was an event that brought together young people from different places. And showing that it wasn't just the colleges working together, it was also us. And I'd like to think in some ways David Attenborough is our voice of the planet and the future in some ways. And so for me, there's something about how when we're thinking about collaboration involvement in the context of well-being plans for future generations, then having future generations there is really important. And so the work that we're doing around involvement and supporting the PSB in this space is in the same way as these bullet points that are listed. And I've taken these directly out of the Future Gens Maturity Matrix. You may or may not have had time to go through the kind of detail of it, but there's some really useful top line headings that we can start thinking about. How do we know that these things are taking place? Not just what it looks like. The Young People's event could have been a young people's event without any of this involvement taking place, and it would have, the output would have been still the same. We'd have ticked off and said we'd got a bunch of young people in the room. What was really important in the process and the work that we've been doing was to remember that this was more than consultation. This wasn't just extracting ideas and information from our young people. This was about, reaching a larger group, and it's very much the beginning of that journey. And we recognise that we won't have all of the young people with all of the knowledge and all of the connections in the room, but we have to start somewhere. So it's about reaching a diversity and continuing to reach a diversity of people. That we're open for real change to result, and that it's meaningful and effective. And so, there's a how are we doing that? Are we seeing that embedded in all the work that we do? That we're moving from problem defining to delivery, so that we're seeing involvement throughout that, not just the definition of what is the issue for you, how can you get involved in the delivery of it, and how does that look again? And we're asking those questions now as we move into a delivery phase. We're really interested in how we can support the work of the PSB in that delivery and involving our communities in that work. Seeking help to achieve the goals and desires of the future. So, what is the help? Who are the other wider partnerships? Maybe some of that work that we've done around getting to know each other with our paper people could provide some insight into that space. Maybe there's something around the setting up of an insights network that can help to provide some of that. And then recognising the needs of current and future generations. Whether that's we've got David Attenborough at the table, or we've got young people at the table, or we've got an empty chair, just to recognise those future generations aren't with us yet. As I know Helen at Future Gens likes to use that, ensuring that we're building that in. So the work that we do is really holding that sense together. But yeah, the maturity matrix is really great for having all those hows and that ways of working across them all. So I've just picked out the involvement one, but there is so much more that we're using to help us, sort of on that journey. I was thinking about this morning. I'm going to go off on a little tangent about how if we thought about involvement and collaboration being the North Star of where we needed to get, and then how maybe these how we work, our ways of working, and the hows underneath that are really sort of our map and our journey planner, and understanding, what that is to get there. I'm not just ploughing ahead on the motorway, but really wiggling our way and exploring that we're taking the right route. Okay, just move on to the next bit. So again, this is a piece of work that I'm going to invite you to do, something that we enjoy doing all the time, with our postcards from the future. We find this a really useful tool. We recently did this with the young people last week, and we asked them about their postcards from the future, from their future selves, about in 5 years' time, this is what it looks like. I thought it'd be really interesting to do a bit of a twist on this for us, and I just really like you to think about what collaboration involvement looks like to you. So giving you a taster of some of the work that we've been doing at the Co-Production Network with the PSB, and I know you've had some training from Future Gens, and you know we're working in this space of involvement and collaboration and serving our communities all the time, but really thinking about what does that look like? How will you know it's taken place? So if you had to write a postcard from the future in 1 year's time, what would you want to say about, I knew there's been some great collaboration, it looks like this. So I'm just going to talk you through some ideas about what you might want to think about, and maybe it's an invitation to note them down, or you know, just maybe create a picture in your head or something. But this is something that we quite like to do, and just demonstrate what that work looks like. And so for our postcard from the future, I'd like you to transport yourself into a meeting room 1 year from now. Maybe we're on Teams again in a year's time, and hopefully, you know, it'd be nice if we were in person, and we're seated around a table, or we're in a breakout room with somebody if we're on Teams or Zoom, and we've got that cup of coffee, cup of tea, and just who else is in that room, who else is on that Teams call, and what does that atmosphere feel like? We start off lots of our planning at Co-Production Network thinking about how do we want people to feel in this space. And I know when I asked the question earlier about what were the principles of collaboration for you, talked about trust. So it's how do we know, what does trust feel like? How do we know there's trust? You know, how does partnership working feel? What do people look like when that's taking place? What's the expressions on their face? Maybe what's their body language? And also in that space that maybe you're sat in, thinking about, you know, are there examples of work and projects that you can see on the wall? Is there, you know, those things that maybe you could note down, oh, I'm sat in the meeting room and I can see that this amazing thing has taken place. Is there lots of conversation? Is everybody just sat in silence? So just having a few thoughts about what might be included on that postcard. And again, that's a task that that's my final task that I'm going to leave you with, just to give you a bit of a taster of how we work in. And I've just flipped the final slide. Thanks, Sarah, is how we're going to work going forward. And there was a really early slide where I'd had some key phrases, sort of keywords in bold. And you might not notice at the time, but maybe when you look back at the slides, be able to spot it. And the work that we'll be continuing to do is really thinking about the offer. How is the invitation shared into these spaces? How do we collaborate? How do we invite people in, particularly in those involvement pieces in our communities? How do we continue to invite maybe young people into the work that the PSB are doing? Those wider conversations, who are we not hearing from? And I think I'm thinking it was mentioned earlier about, you know, reaching out to the people whose voices aren't heard, who are quieter, you know, whether that's in the meeting space at the boardroom or whether that's within our communities. So really understanding and identify who we're not hearing from. Working with people, working within the PSB, you know, and beyond, having that time for reflection and feedback. So how do we know that there is a change? We can go, how do we know this, whether that's through just some debriefing sessions, or whether we're seeing, you know, the delivery really stepping up. So how do we know things are changing? That research, so being able to build on the work of Elizabeth Woodcock and more, and really understanding what that is and how can we use that, and how can we put that into practice, how are we sharing what we're doing, how are we communicating and who with, are we building those relationships, and how do we keep up this work long term? How is it sustainable? How do we nurture it and ensure that there's a legacy? And then right down the bottom, I just put adapt. I think there's always in this that we always have to adapt and keep up on it, and just keep experimenting, I think. And again, some of the ideas that come up it might not be the right time for those ideas, but let's not lose them always. So yeah, so that's how what we've been doing so far. That's what a bit of a flavour of how we do it. And and yeah, what we intend to go forward with. So thank you very much. If anybody's got any questions, I'm happy to take them. And even if they don't pop in now, please feel free to follow up with any questions later on. Thank you.
Right, first of all, can I thank Becky for the presentation? Some very interesting issues raised there. And my apologies to Becky for not introducing you. It's Becky Let Go from Corporate Action Network. My apologies for that, Becky.
That's okay.
Okay, and once again, thank you for the presentation. Right, open to members. Any questions, please? Right, now I don't know if it's a legacy one with Councillor Simon Griffiths. I've got first, and then Councillor Amanda Williams, and then Councillor Cheryl Evans. So, sorry.
Apologies, Chair, it was a legacy hand.
Okay, right, Councillor Amanda Williams.
Thanks very much, Chair. I was at the young persons conference last week, and it was very interesting to hear their views. Most of them felt that there was no involvement with them. There was a gap. There was lots of things for younger people to do, younger children we focus on in our communities, and then there were events for older adults, but they felt that there was a gap missing. We did the postcards to the future, and we were asking the questions about whether any of them would become involved in their communities or want to be, how they would know how to do it. And interestingly, BBC Wales this morning have put an article out online about young people getting into politics, becoming councillors, and they were saying the same thing. Young people who they've interviewed have said the same thing, that they don't feel that they can they know where to get the information from, and the language that they're using is not the language of young people anymore. I mean, I've got 3 children. I have no idea what they're telling me anymore. The terminology's all changed. And so I wondered, in that event, you took all the post-it notes which you referred to in your meeting. How will you use those post-it notes now and feed back to us so that we can take all of their concerns forward and make sure that we are listening to them, rather than just turning up and having a nice lunch in the middle of an event, that we do really care about what they were saying and their concerns, so that when you're saying what we'll be like in a year's time, we will have some of those people in our meetings and we will have done some of the things they've asked for us to do, please.
Yeah, thank you. Really great question. There are a couple of things that will come out of the event, one of which is all of those post-it notes. There was a phone booth available for the young people to leave vox pops, and those conversations. There is going to be a video compiled with all of that will be shared. So there'll be a nice polished piece that will come out of that, that is going to look really good. And I just had the vox pops sent over yesterday, so I have those to sit through and listen to, as well as all the post-it notes that were shared. We also invited some young people, or invited all of the young people at the end of the event to come up if there was any that were already interested in stepping into that space. And I know that those details have been shared. I think from the co-production network point of view, we're there to support with the PSB to take that on in a way that makes sense for the young people, so that it's not lost. We're there as that critical friend to continue to remind, this event happened, what's the output, what has happened with that, how are we feeding back, how are we feeding back timely as well? You know, that event was Friday, that's already a week ago. So how do we ensure that we recognise the time that was put into that and continue that momentum? And there were also conversations about how do we sort of support going to young people where young people are at. There was a really interesting comment on the day where I think young people said, well, I'm in college, I'm here, why don't you just come and visit me? And really building those relationships with those places and supporting that relationship building. So yeah, does that answer it enough? So yeah, so I think we're in a strange position as Co-Pro Network because we're sitting there to support that work. So I think we're able to ask those questions that you're asking, Councillor Williams, about, you know, how will it get fed back? How will we hear what has been done with it so it isn't lost?
Okay. Right, Councillor Cheryl Evans. Then I've
Thank
got
you.
Mark Brace.
Thank you, Chair. In a similar vein, really, I noticed on one of your slides you mentioned you were considering working long term with young people. But I mean, I think it's very important that you do work with young people, and not just ones in the college environment, because of course we do have sixth form schools where children are the same age as in college, so they should be included as well. And as Councillor Williams said, you had the post-it notes and you've had their views, and it would be nice if we could have you know, a document showing what their views were and what they would like to see. And then, you know, hopefully, perhaps there could be a plan in place for one or two of those things to come to fruition, because what we need to do, these young adults have taken their time to come to this event to express their views. If nothing is happening or nothing is produced, you know, a report or anything at the end of it, they're not going to engage with us again. And then we've lost then, you know, these young adults, when we should be capturing them and nurturing them and showing that we are truly listening to what they're saying to us.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think the slide you're referring to where I put considering, I think probably I've meant considering the way in which we do that and not considering if it happens. It's actually, how do we do that in a way that makes sense for the young people and that's driven by them? And it's not just, you know, from my point of view, we're not just inviting a couple of young people into a meeting. We're making this a really meaningful and positive experience, and not an experience of one that we think is the right way to do that, but that is a piece of work that's done together. And also in terms of broadening, you know, the young people and, you know, the diversity of young people in that space, we recognise that sometimes we just have to start somewhere, and that we can't involve all the young people all of the time, all in one room, and that this is just a starting point. This is a piece of work with Bridgend College, who were, you know, happy to take the lead on this. But we'd love to work with lots of other organisations, schools, colleges, and reach other young people with the resources and the capacity that is available to do that. And as Co-Production Network, we would always say, you know, that some really good, meaningful engagement is better than none, because you want to do it perfectly and involve everybody. So, and there'll be lots of learnings from that. And again, when some of the young people that we spoke to, Mark and myself spoke to at the end, are well connected to other organisations as well. So it has a bit of a snowballing effect of understanding, oh, they might be already sitting on a youth council or involved in some youth organising and activism as well. So we can begin to build out into diversifying those conversations and further. But absolutely, we want to make sure that those views just don't get lost. Those post-it notes don't just disappear, or it's just a nice shiny video that we watch once and that's the end of it. It has to have real value and real future to it.
Okay, I've got Mark.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Maybe just to answer some of the questions from Councillor Williams, Councillor Evans, but also maybe to incorporate some of the updates I've got from last week as well. But before I do, just to thank Becky, Trina and the PSP support group for all the work they're doing in terms of the co-production stuff. I think the panel, as a panel, you recognise that a lot of work has gone in over the last 18 months to get the PSP to where they are, especially as a new board. So I think, you know, it's not a case of we've made it up as we've gone along. There's been a lot of thinking that's gone into it, and Becky, Trina and the support group has made us think as a board in terms of where we want to get to and what we want to do. So thank you very much for that, and hopefully as a panel you'll be able to see the work that we've done to establish the new board. Secondly, I'm amazed it's only been a week since the young person's event. This time last week we were in the middle of it doing one of those exercises, but time flies, doesn't it? But just to answer some of those questions, there's always been a bit of a stereotype, if you like, in terms of young people being a hard to reach group, and I think last week dispelled that, and I said that on the day in terms of the amount of or the ability or the need or the want of the young people to get involved last week was inspiring, really, in terms of what the messages they were coming up with, how they wanted to be involved. As Becky said, we were sort of inundated at the end in terms of people wanted to be involved in contributing. And I think it was a bit of a milestone moment for me in terms of how do we take that forward. Yes, we're going to collate all the information and all the notes from last week, but I think what I want to do as chair of the board is how do we facilitate that long-term sustainable involvement from young people. So one of the things I was speaking to the college representatives last week is for me to go out, an offer for me to go out and meet the young people in their environment. It's difficult probably for them to come to a board meeting and explain what they want to be and how they want to be involved. But I'm more than happy to, I'm prepared to go out and meet them in an environment that's comfortable for them to establish how they can contribute, and maybe create a young person sub board as well for the PSB to raise, or as an opportunity for them to raise their ideas and their concerns in terms of how we can help them as a board. So I think, as Becky said, we need to continue the conversation. From our perspective, is how best to do that and the right environment to do that. We don't want to lose their contribution, because it's a really important one, because as a PSB we need to consider the needs of all the communities and all aspects of that community. The other thing that came out last week is we shouldn't see young people as a group. There are specific differences and difference of opinions and different ideas within the young people as well. So I think it's important that we capture all those as well. So I thought it was a fantastic event. I thought there was a brilliant contribution from the young people involved. It was an opportunity for them to understand what we do as a PSB, but also for us to understand what their opinions are as well. And I think, the critical thing for me is to understand those and how they can contribute, but how best to take that forward, and what mechanisms are best for them to have that long-term contribution to the working of the PSB, and again, how we as a PSB can support their needs and their future requirements. It's not the end, it's the start of the conversation, I'd say. And I think, from my perspective as chair, it's how we enable them to do that in a comfortable and a reassuring way, and on their terms, really. And I think, just to answer your point, Councillor Evans, yes, we need to broaden our horizons in terms of engaging with young people. This is a stepping stone, isn't it? It's the first step in terms of the stepping stone. And I think if we can work with those colleges that were there last week, and almost get a model of how we can engage with young people, then we can take that to a wider basis. But I think it's important that we don't see last week from a perspective of it was good for the board. It's about how we engage with young people, and last week was that first step on a journey in terms of making sure that they're involved in the long term.
Thank you, Mark. Councillor Alex Williams.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks, Becky, for that presentation. Just building on what Mark said then, and by the way, I'm still working on my self-portrait. I'm not a very good drawer. But of course, transparency in decision-making processes and stakeholder engagement with key groups such as young people are crucial. But can I ask whether the PSB has gone any further than that yet? Further than just how they're going to achieve their collaborative objectives? It may very well be too early for this, but sort of going forward from a scrutiny perspective, surely this should include regular reviews of collaborative projects, evaluating the impact on community outcomes, and ensuring then accountability by utilising key performance indicators aligned with project goals, milestones to regularly assess progress. So can I ask, Becky, what have you done to assist the PSB to date to actually achieve collaboration rather than just focus on the how? And has the PSB started doing this, or is it still a work in progress?
My answer to that would be that this is very much a work in progress, in terms of, you know, sort of the work plan in this space. The collaboration event was in July, and that was really about digging deep into how do we all understand that together? What does that need to look like? And developing some actions out of that in terms of collaboration. You know, I don't know the answers around the measuring, and I think that would be a really interesting piece of work that we could look at specifically. I think that would be of real value, and we haven't got, you know, to that yet. But that's not to say it's not always at the forefront of our mind, and maybe we do it in terms of our reflections and understanding, you know, who have we got, who's speaking at the board, how are different things coming about, are there projects in the pipeline? And that's probably not in terms of a co-production network space that we would sit quite so much. However, we'd be happy to support, you know, in those conversations. Is there practice from other PSBs as well that we could bring into that? That's a question we could take back into, you know, the other clusters that we're working with and going, how does this look for you? Is there some practice that we can take on whilst this is a work in progress?
Great, thank you very much, Becky.
Okay, I've got Councillor Jill Bonetto and Mark wants to come back in. Jill?
Yeah, it's good to hear that working with the young people, but can I ask, going into the colleges and doing the work there, do you use any other thing? Because there's a lot of young people out there who don't particularly like meetings or meeting up. So are you looking at other means, or are you already using other means of getting other young people involved?
Do you want me to come back? I can answer
Yeah,
that.
you're
Okay.
welcome back.
I think that's one of the things we can learn from last week. Yes, you're right. It's and that's one of the things I forgot to say is that you know, we had to start somewhere on the board in terms of engaging with young people, and last week was that first step. But we are clearly and very much aware that not all young people are in education. For example, there are lots of different opportunities to engage them with people outside of education as well. I think one of the things that we need to learn from last week is how they want to be engaged with and how best we can engage with them, because you know, again, it's a bit of a stereotype and a cliche, but in terms of the engagement we do, it's not always geared at young people in young people's language. So that's one of the things we need to learn from last week, is how best we can engage with them and on what basis they want us to engage with them to get their opinions and their feedback. So I think last week wasn't only about beginning that conversation, it's understanding how we can progress that conversation on a wider basis with people, not just within you know, it's easy for us to go to those organizations like colleges where young people are. The difficult thing for us is to expand that into where young, you know, into non-organizational based young people, if you like, and how we engage with them. And I think that's part of that in terms of how do we get better at engaging with people that perhaps we haven't been good at engaging with before. So that's part of that. So that's part of the learning from last week as well, and part of the model that we need to create. Just going back on Councillor Williams' question on performance, I think again it's about learning lessons. I think that's one of the lessons we learned from the last cycle of the PSB in terms of the when the boards were separate, is that how do we measure the success of a PSB? Because sometimes some of the work is not tangible enough to put a price on it, if you like, or a measure on it. So that's one of the things that we need to learn in terms of how can we measure ourselves as a board to make sure that we provide that level of reassurance to the panel, for example. I think one of the things for me is one of the things we've started to do in is sort of a mapping exercise is and it came through health in terms of what activity is being done to under each of the priority areas, and I think what we've done is expanded that to the whole membership of the PSB in terms of what are you doing under each of those priority areas, that we can understand what each other is doing and maybe use resources and more effectively and identify where we're duplicating effort. So I think some of the measurable bits is how we perform better as a board or as members of a board in terms of addressing the issues, and it might not be a key thing in terms of how the board is performing, but I think what it does do is improve the way the board is performing in terms of the use of the resources. So I think it's small steps. We're still learning the lessons from the last cycle, but I think with the work that's been done with the co-production network, but also what we've done as a board since we started as the merged board in terms of coming together and identifying where we can make a difference, and will help us understand how we can better justify the work of the board. I think that's one of the key things for me, is how do we justify our existence as a board and make sure that we are doing things that add value. So I think, yes, it's an ongoing process, but there are little bits that we're doing to try and resolve that.
Thank you, Mark. Councillor Granville.
Thank you, Chair. Can I thank Becky for a very interesting presentation? But Mark, can I just say, perhaps one of the ideas perhaps that we could put forward, and I would today, is why don't you perhaps put and go into towns and community areas and ask people on the ground, a simple form, tick box exercise, and you get a diversity of all people could be answering these questions that you want. So it's just not colleges and sixth form, it's across the board, so you're getting a fair quality of answers back across the whole spectrum of people. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Mark, do you want to reply?
Yeah, and part of our engagement model, if you like, needs to incorporate things like that. It's not just about electronic engagement and surveys virtually, if you like. It's about how we best get responses, and I think we need to incorporate things like that. The other thing for me is using your expertise as councillors in terms of how you engage with the public and young people, how we can take that on board as a PSB as well, and we discussed it at the last scrutiny panel as well, is how do we get maybe young people on the scrutiny panel in terms of the young person's voice, so they can scrutinise what we're doing from a different perspective.
Thank you, Mark. Any other member? Just to make my own observations, I think consultation, Councillor Granville is right. There are established practices within local authorities for consultation, particularly on budgets and service delivery areas, any changes. So it's well-established practice that we could pick up on and maybe put into use. Just a comment on the youth event last week, which I thought the event itself was brilliant, but my personal disappointment coming away, Mark, and I don't want to be critical. When I did engage with some of the young people, they didn't fully comprehend what the PSB was about. And I think there's an issue about communication and how we manage that. Written documents, let's be honest, to a degree, are a thing of the past with young people. They very much dependent on social media, which I think Councillor Bonetto alluded to. So I'm just wondering, as we move forward, and if we are, if the PSB is considering widening the net other than FEs to go into sixth forms, or indeed to go on the street, is that we look at a social media platform. I know it's difficult managing social media. It is very, very difficult because sometimes you get comments or activity that you don't want and you don't welcome, which is difficult. But I'm just wondering if going forward that we use the tools that young people use today rather than the tools that we are used to in receiving reams and reams of paper or online reports that we sift through. Even today, I think the newer councillors today would probably tell us that they can't read every report, but they may scan read and pick up the points that they feel relevant to their opinions on a report. So I'm just wondering now, you know, as a strategy going forward, how we can improve communication. You know, the one-off event, great last week. I did thoroughly enjoy that, but I did feel that young people in the conversations give me the impression they felt a little bit alienated from the process. So to me, there's a communication issue there. So I don't know if anybody wants to respond to that.
No, you're absolutely right, Chair. And I think part of the conversation, sort of the aftermath of last week, was the opportunity of maybe using some of the expertise within the colleges to promote the PSB and how we can do that through the mechanisms and the channels that they've got, but also that will probably reach more of an audience than we ever will.
Yeah.
And in a way that is more better received than anything we'd ever do. So I think again, that's an opportunity that came out of last week, and I think it would be remiss of us as a board to ignore any of those opportunities, or not to take up any of those opportunities that came out of last week in terms of how we could not just improve our engagement with young people, but promote ourselves as a board through, and the activities of the board through young people as well, because you know, they've got a part to play in helping us deliver their priorities. Is how we get them engaged, both as a method of understanding, but also a contribution as well. And as Becky said, you know, after the event, there were plenty of people who came up and asked how they could be involved. We need to take that opportunity to help them become involved with the board.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Right, any other members? I got Councillor Granville coming back in. Yep.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say to Mark and to Becky, look, we've got 3 local authorities in your patch, right? I would suggest, it's only a suggestion, that we have got a web pages in all local authorities, right, where people can see what we are doing. Why don't you ask the local authorities if you could put a web page up on our stuff so people can read all about what you're doing, right? So they got an insight, and it's easy then. If anybody got any queries, the queries are there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that comment. I think maybe the officers can take that something back for discussion and maybe put something together so we can see that perhaps that could be presented obviously to the PSB first and then ourselves if the PSB decides to implement something along that lines. But I think it's something the officers would need to go back and discuss. Yeah.
We've already got a website, Chair, so we can put a link on there to refer to us as well. But yeah, more than happy to explain or explore any opportunity. And I think one of the key things for me, like I said at the last meeting, is it would be good if the scrutiny panel were advocates for the work of the PSB. What we need to do then is help you understand what the PSB do as well. So you know, it's the opportunities to provide as much information on what the PSB does needs to be looked at, and you know, we're happy to take up all those opportunities when they present themselves.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. We've had a good airing on that item on the agenda. Again, once again, thanks to Becky for the presentation. Has obviously stimulated some thought and debate amongst members, and I thank members for their contribution. If we can move on now, and actually it's down to the report of the chair of the PSB. I don't know if there's anything more we can add. You know, of the officers of the year today, Ellen Hammond and Lisa. So I don't know who's going to kick off first.
If I kick off, Joe, I think the report's there. There were 2 aspects to it. One was the young persons event. I think we've covered that. The other one was the workforce wellbeing sub board, and I think Emma's here to give an update on that.
Oh, right. Okay.
Hi everyone. Sorry,
No, carry on, Emma. Sorry.
Okay, so hi everyone. So thank you for your invite today. I recognise some of you here from my other hats that I wear. and from my previous life as well in other roles. So thank you. And I'd also like to say thank you for Becky for raising the bar so high with her presentation and activities, and apologise that I'm going to be just talking to the report. So I'm here to represent the Workforce Wellbeing Subgroup, which was a group that originated from Bridgend kind of prior to the creation of the Morgannwg sort of merger. It was created with the aim that while the kind of sort of like public service board is sort of looking at the sort of like wide citizens, all of us as members of the PSB have employees that are also citizens, where we've got a much sort of closer relationship. So with that sort of like direct relationship, we felt that there was like a real opportunity for us to sort of like drive through sort of like changes and those sort of like well-being agenda via our role as employers. And once the merger happened, we've extended our group obviously to cover the whole Morgannwg area. We really kind of like think a lot, and I think this obviously has come out in the sort of like previous conversation around tangible outcomes, and it's probably something that everybody is talking about now, isn't it? So how do we get from these ideals into kind of like actual actions? So when we got the new wellbeing plan for 23 to 28, we created a workshop with our members. And this is maybe where we can say we were a little bit creative, like Becky. And we also did like a postcard or a newspaper article for the future, for us to try and sort of say that, you know, if we were a success, if we managed to do everything that we want to do, what will that look like, to try and get our kind of creative juices flowing. And you can see the newspaper article in the report there. And then we use the sort of 3 horizon model, which, as I understand it, is a model that's been used kind of across the PSB to start to understand sort of like where we want to be and that how we're going to get there. You can see in the report there is a table of the areas that we sort of pull together. Some of the key areas that we're looking at is sort of supporting an aging workforce, mental health support in the workplace, diversity in recruitment, and also trying to capitalize on the fact that there's an awful lot of services and specialist knowledge within each of our organizations. So how can we start to kind of capture that and then disseminate that through our own workforces as well, so that people find accessing services or programs that are happening sort of easier. So using it as another kind of communication method. I think what's also interesting is that we can be, I think, reasonably fast moving. So at the last sort of PSB board meeting, Paul Mears raised an issue around the sort of fostering and supporting fostering care. We were able to pick that up, and we've already met as a group and come up with a plan about how we can help fostering and support fostering and care within our workplaces and have a plan going forward. So I think that's a real nice example of how we can kind of like be flexible as a group, and, as I say, take some of these ideas and start to kind of filter them into action. I would say that probably one of the kind of challenges that we face are that we're big organizations where maybe change doesn't happen quickly. So we're trying to sort of like identify areas where there are low-hanging fruits and we can make kind of changes, but then also there's sort of like those kind of policy approaches that may be sort of slower moving beasts. And also I think one of the other sort of challenges we face is that our membership, we don't necessarily have the same people attend every meeting. We've got a core group of people who really come along. So I think we really want to sort of expand out those core groups. So that we have a more sort of like stable membership and a sort of stable view. So that's where we are. So I don't know if you've got any comments on that or on the report that's in the papers.
Right, before I go to members, any officer want to make any other contribution? No? Right,
Just
members,
so,
sorry,
Chair,
Mark, go on.
just to say thanks to Emma for the update, and this is a key group for us because, as Emma said, it's about you know, the PSB covers the members of the and the workforce within the organisations around the table, not just who are part of the communities across Clontarf Morgannwg. So it's key for us to be able to help and support those people who work for the organisations, for member organisations as well as communities. But in some ways, we get a clear identification of what some of the community issues are through this group as well. So it's a good opportunity for us to link that across to the priorities and the work we do with to deliver services as well. So just thanks to Emma for the update, and if there is anything that we can help with, or anything that members would like to raise, then please do.
Over to members. Anybody, any issues, any questions? Right, Councillor Cheryl Evans.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be perfectly honest, I've never heard about the Three Horizons model before. I'm wondering if you could give us a bit more information about it, please.
Yes. So it's a model that it's a tool really for trying to sort of like develop and sort of like generate ideas and planning. You start off with sort of Horizon 1, so sort of like, you know, what is the kind of evidence for change? So, you know, what are we all experiencing? What are we seeing? What are the challenges that actually are on the ground? For example, we had in ours, you know, that staff are exhausted, that, you know, people are getting older, we're losing skills, so there's like an aging workforce. You know, there's not like a collective public sector approach. We've sort of experienced we're all doing like different things, and then, you know, there's a shortage of staff across the board. So those were the kind of like challenges we were all evidencing. So then Horizon 2 is what we're going to do. So what the kind of practical things do we want to take? So we looked at things like, you know, work-life balance. That's going to be a topic that we're going to take forward. You know, more collaboration. How can we share ideas across the different organisations and sort of like, you know, work together to build on what we're doing? You know, how are we going to find out more about mental health support and training? So those were the sort of, you know, the what we're going to do. And then kind of like we wanted to sort of set those goals, which is Horizon 3, about what we want our outcomes to be. So, you know, we want to make sure that people have got better opportunities through their careers, that people feel that they can like change and flex their careers depending on what their needs are and to train, and those sorts of outcomes. And then we've got, as you can see, sort of like through the report, there are sort of various different topics, and that's how we've sort of set our work plan going forward. And obviously we kind of based it on this document as well to make sure we were on track and we weren't going off on a tangent.
Okay. Any other member? No. No, I was going to ask the same question as Councillor Evans asked, so thank you for the reply on that one. No other members? Well, can I thank Emma and Mark for this report? And Councillor Evans, I got you back in.
Yeah, sorry. Once you've done the report, is there any timescale when the action plan will be ready to be shared with us?
So I think the idea is that we're kind of like we're picking kind of like topics out of this and sort of like and taking them forward. We're trying to sort of find where our kind of quick wins are at the moment, and as we meet, we're talking about how we can bring sort of like each of these elements to life. Who do we need to come and speak to us about it? So, you know, that's kind of where we are at the moment.
Right, sorry, excuse me. Right. Are there any other members? And we have some recommendations that we've been asked to move. Oh, sorry. Councillor Granville, did I get you?
Sorry, Chair, I'm just going to ask a late question to Emma, really. Is there any cost implement into any of this that you're doing? Is it coming out of, what budgets are coming out of the money to do this kind of work, as you're saying, Emma? Like you're saying about mental health, is that in-house, you're doing stuff like that, or not?
Yes. So the idea is it's about how we kind of like do what we're doing differently, I think. So there's no money going into this as yet, although if someone wants to give us money, I'm sure we could spend it. But it's about how we kind of like collaborate as organizations. We all do training, we all have policies on different things. So it's how do we sort of like start to pull that together to like impact our workforce within that kind of like well-being plan. So it's using kind of like resources that we already have and trying to bend those and pull them together so that we make the best use of them, and that the best use of maybe having a kind of coordinated approach. So, you know, there's lots of kind of very big organizations like the NHS and, you know, and to be fair, the local authorities as well. And then organizations like mine, like housing associations, are comparatively much smaller. So it means that we can kind of like benefit from each other's knowledge. And we're also trying to capitalize on the sort of services that we deliver. So, you know, can we do leaflets on in-work benefits from the DWP? So it doesn't cost them anything to pull that together. Then we can kind of distribute that through all our organizations. Or can I do something on access to social housing, and then we can sort of like distribute that through, and so that we just make the best use of what we've got, really. So hopefully we're a useful and economical group.
Oh, well, thank you for that, Chair. Can I just ask one supplementary, because it was asked about Horizon. Can we have some written detail of Horizon, how it came about that the trust, Cwmtaf used this facility, right? You know, and how they picked that one, right? And what's in it, the background of how they're going to do it. And so we got a briefing ourselves so we understand the logic of them going forward using this facility. Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Yes, Chair, I think there was some nods from Helen and Lisa. I think we've got some information on that we can share.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you. Okay, then we've two recommendations that we need to move. Obviously, we've scrutinised. The first one is to scrutinise the work of the PSP, and the other then is to provide recommendations, which obviously in this debate we have raised some number of issues to take away, and I'm sure the officers will pick those up and take them away and respond accordingly. Can I thank everyone, the officers and Mark, for the contribution today. Really helpful, very informative, and thank you. Just a quick request on Becky, I should have asked earlier. Is it possible that we could share your slide presentation with members so they got that as a matter of record? I'd appreciate that if we can do it. Okay, sorry, Mark, you want to come back in?
Yeah, sorry, Chair, just a last plea really, in terms of we mentioned at the last scrutiny panel about the opportunity for us, the PSB and the panel, to work together. So if there's anything that's come up today that members have got any suggestions or ideas about, please can you let us know, and then hopefully then we can work together in terms of making sure everybody's or our engagement captures everything, and we can work together then to make the PSB a success.
Yeah, can we take that through the officers so you can feed in? So for members' information, if there's anything you want to raise or feedback, please take it to the officers for the PSB. Okay, thank you.
I think that's true co-production. Looking at Becky.
Yeah, and co-production. Yeah, sorry. Thank you, Mark. Right, if we can move on then. Item 6, this should be interesting. Scrutiny work programme. Sarah, you taking us through that one, or was it Lisa?
Yes, that's myself, Chair. Thank you.
Right, thank you.
Yes, so thank you, members. So the purpose of this report is to provide members of the Morgannwg Public Service Board JOS Committee with the opportunity to consider matters in respect of its work programme for the remainder of the 2022-24 municipal year. The report recommends that members consider items they wish to see on the JOS Forward Work Programme and any training requirements that you feel would be helpful to support you. And I'll pause there, Chair, and take any comments. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, members? Right, Councillor Williams.
Thanks very much, Chair. As I mentioned earlier in our pre-meeting, I strongly believe that this board should be a more strategic board rather than examining the granular level detail at a thematic level. So what I would strongly suggest is that we look at the evidence base for our wellbeing assessment, which formed the wellbeing plan for the Public Services Board. So there are a number of different areas which I mentioned earlier on, but for the purpose of the formal meeting, they are physical health, mental health, community, housing and homelessness, cultural well-being, environmental well-being, and economic well-being. Now, perhaps if we can incorporate that in our themes for our forward work programme for future meetings, we can therefore ask for reports on areas which were highlighted by yourself and others, such as perhaps looking at a risk factor for a future health pandemic, for example, and that could be encompassed in physical health. And we can take a more thematic and strategic approach around this area, because I'm conscious of the fact that if we delve into very specific details on our forward work programme, we could get bogged down in the nitty-gritty granular detail and not actually add some value to the Public Services Board. So that would be my suggestion, but obviously I'm happy to take other members' advice as well.
Okay. Any other members? No? No. My personal comment was, and I did raise it previously, is about crisis management in a sense. We had vast experience of what happened through COVID, how we reacted, how the relevant bodies reacted to it, and how we engaged. And then there was the sort of, if I could put in these terms, the sort of post-COVID fallout where we had issues about people's mental health and well-being, and also the impact it had on behaviour in schools. So the sort of wider impact of COVID, we are now beginning to analyse and come forward. One thing that I do believe was a success in some respects was how quick local authorities, the health trusts, police, all coordinated their activities to deal with the pandemic. But then the wider issues which we're now experiencing, we weren't prepared for. And there is a knock-on effect, obviously. If, for example, we have a winter bed crisis every year in hospitals, we have ambulance issues, stacking up outside A&Es. Part of that is to do with discharge, So, giving it some thought, we've got a lot of experience. We do a lot of individual emergency planning, but bringing it together on a more strategic basis so that when we do experience a pandemic, and as I understand it, the World Health Organizations are telling us that every 10 years we're likely to see something of this nature. How well prepared are we? And in dealing with a pandemic, whether it's a flu crisis, or Ebola, or whatever it is going to be in future, then how do we deal with the aftermath? Because we now starting to feel the pinch in a sense. Because, when we look at, I don't want to be political about it, but we're now starting to pay the price in public services for dealing with the COVID pandemic. We are seeing some austerity measures coming through to pay for what we had to pay out in the pandemic. So there's so many facets to this this issue. But I think that if we are prepared in some shape or form, then we can start hitting the ground running to deal with it, so that the left-hander knows what the right hand's doing. Do we need emergency control centres? If you remember rightly, at one time each local authority had its crisis control centres. They were regarded as nuclear bunkers when I first started as a councillor, but they were more about emergency planning, if the truth was known. So I'm just wondering if members got any thoughts on that, so that we can plan moving forward. It is more strategic. It impacts on many of the service areas we all deliver and experience. So I've got Councillor Amanda Williams.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think we discussed earlier as well about the impact this had on children in schools and in education, the pandemic, and how if we're going to look at well-being and how it's been affected, we need to also consider education. And I mentioned briefly in our pre-meeting that there's been a look at education cuts throughout Wales, and the Welsh Government cutting education contributions. And then in order to balance budgets, there's going to be some difficulties to be made by local authorities too. But my concern is that the well-being of our children will be impacted with that, particularly when it will be the additional support staff who are focused on well-being and supporting those children who require the support, who will be cut as a result of that. So I've got significant concerns if we're talking about the well-being of future generations. This is our future generation, the first one, our young children, and we need to be mindful of that and ensure that we're not just looking at the effects of the next critical incident that might occur, but that we're also not letting down those children now who've already been through one and still require that support. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Williams. Any other members? No. Oh, sorry, I've got Councillor Alex Williams, and then Mark, and then Councillor Cheryl Evans. Alex.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. It was remiss of me not to mention what I mentioned earlier, and that was the suggestion that we have a heat map and an action log, so we can monitor key performance indicators and objectives and key results of the Public Services Board, because it's important that any scrutiny committee isn't just a talking shop, as it is that we monitor actions and that the Public Services Board, we act as a critical friend to the Public Services Board. It's not holding the board to account as such, because that's quite a sort of threatening kind of word, but it's acting as a critical friend to provide some recommendations to the board on its improvements. So that's what I would suggest. We use it in Bridgend, and I'm sure you do as well in your respective local authorities. So I would suggest that kind of log and of key performance indicators and objectives and key results in all of the different wellbeing areas, which I've already mentioned, is incorporated in our discussions in future.
Yeah, I think it's a process of, as you say, being a critical friend and challenge it. Continuous challenge. Right, Mark, you want to come back in?
Does Councillor Evans want to go first? I'll come in at the end if you want.
Okay, Councillor Cheryl Evans.
Thanks. Just following what yourself, Chair, was saying about future planning. That is an excellent idea, because we don't want to be on the back foot, so to speak, like we were with the COVID pandemic. But that has left us with a lot of issues, a lot of mental health issues, particularly in children who I do think were severely affected with the pandemic. But there are so many issues that health covers. You've got the ambulance waiting times, lack of GP appointments, the hospital waiting lists. So I think it's going to take a lot of years to sort that out. And, you know, whilst, you know, on the back foot, we do have to plan in case another event comes. But I mean, we need to try and sort out what the pandemic has left us with, to sort that out sooner than later, particularly with our younger children, because of course they are the future, and if we can't help them now, we are, you know, we will definitely have problems in the future. So it is important that we try and get back to where we were pre-pandemic as soon as we can.
Thanks, Cheryl. Right, Mark.
Yeah, it's sort of reflecting on last week's thing as well, isn't it? We're here because of the Future Generations Act, so we need to think long term and take all those elements into account as well, and making sure we're acting together, or the members of the board are acting together those for the needs of the future. I think the strategic approach would be really good, and I think what it would do is, if you know, with the panel being a critical friend, it would give us a focus as a board on things to look at, things that we need to look at from your perspective in terms of using your experience of what we do need. I think the next session has got an agenda item on climate change risk assessment. So that's an example of you know, where we can explain what we're doing as a board in terms of those long-term needs and requirements. But I think the other thing for me is the crucial nature of the panel acting as that critical friend to highlight or enabling us as a board to look at specific things. Or you know, if we use those heat maps, for example, it gives us a focus on what we need to look at, and also the ability of us to work with the panel on that proactive approach in terms of these are the areas we're thinking of looking at. What are the specific areas we need to focus on? It enables us, as like I say, to focus on the things we need to focus on to make the difference, and I think that's where we can work together to do that.
I think that's great. Members happy with that approach? Okay, that's excellent. Thank you, Mark, and thanks, members, for your contributions. If we can move on, we're getting closer to the end of the agenda. I'm sure you're all waiting to have some lunch. Any other business? Any members? No, I'm not gonna wait. Okay, right. Item 8 then is a review of myself as chair. I think today we've had a very productive actual meeting. I know we knew that the merger would occupy our time last year, particularly, and has done for a while, and then to establish really some credibility about the work that the PSB is going to undertake. I think the new joint board certainly is starting to hit the ground running and identifying issues and key areas that we need to look at on behalf of the community and indeed the future generations and young people in particular. I think it's critical as we move forward that the information we share is constructive and we are able to monitor and challenge as we move forward and indeed measure what we're doing. At the end of the day, it's one thing to propose things, it's one thing to have a report, but sometimes actions speak louder than words, and those actions need to have an impact in our community. We all know we're in very sort of difficult times, challenging times throughout the country, not just in public services, but right across in the industry as well. A lot of change coming, technology is changing our society rapidly, and we have to be prepared and ready for it. Can I thank Emma earlier, sorry, Becky earlier, and in respect of the youth participation, I think for me as a chair, as a person, as a member, I think engagement with the young people and communication with them is going to be a critical factor in going forward. Those of us who are members of this panel, we have experiences already in public sector service delivery areas. We have knowledge. Young people are very much on the fringes of that, and we need to engage with them so that as we move forward, those people will be the ones of the future who will be discussing about young people in 10, 15 years' time. And, you know, some of the young people seem very keen to gain that knowledge and experience, but we do have to communicate much better with them. I think that's a fair summary. If anybody wants to add anything to that summary. Once again, can I thank all the officers and members for attending today. Welcome to our new members as well. And thank you for the contributions you've all made today. I'm sure that as we move forward, there'll be more interesting debate and discussion, but more importantly, we'll be able to demonstrate that we are achieving things on behalf of our communities and the people we represent in whatever shape or form that may take. So thank you for that. There is another item on the agenda, and that's the information reports. Members are directed to the RCT scrutiny inbox if they wish to make comment on that. That being said, it's just past midday today. Can I thank you all again for your attendance? Hope you have a lovely weekend. I know, looking out of my bay window here in Tylorstown, it's a lovely sunny day out there, maybe cold, but the sun is shining, and I hope it shines on us all this weekend. And whatever you're up to, take care and enjoy your weekend. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks all.
Now close the
Chair.
meeting. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah, by the way.
Thank you, Chair.